A very short introduction to the three speakers of today. Myself, I've been in seed potatoes since 1986, going to my first PMB harvester demonstration in September 85, and having been involved in seed potato companies ever since. Phil McCaul is coming here, 8 years at Greenvale, having been through major businesses, Northern Foods, Aldi, Bakkavor, Moy Park, and bringing his experience on the commercial responsibilities throughout the business. Mike, running a seed potato business and farms business up in Aberdeenshire, and running that business. Any details on the individual ones, please shout up afterwards. Otherwise, we'll try and get through the entire exercise of doing probably a half-day conference in 7 minutes per slide set. You'll be pleased to know it'll be fast and furious, so hopefully you won't have to start resorting to rolling through your phones. I'm just going to put up a few statistics on the industry for context purposes. Then comment as a speaker, as a plant breeder, obviously we're HZPC as it says there. Mike will take that on to a packer's perspective, what is required within the packing industry. And finally, Mike will bring us into the practical reality of producing seed potatoes into the supply chain, as was said by the heading. So a few statistics. There are 1,400 or 14,500 hectares of seed potatoes grown in GB. Of course, post-Brexit, we're pretty well isolated as to what that means. And around about a third of those are grown for export. This is an extrapolation of last year's division of data put into this year's seed area. So there's bound to end up being some anomalies, as the export market is somewhat more challenging, particularly to Egypt this year than last year. French fry is again around about a third, retail fresh a quarter, 17% in crisping, then 1% of other things that go into the horticultural trade, that type of business, the novelty sector. And within that, roughly, sorry, it's quite hard to see from here, 3/4 of it is grown in Scotland and a quarter is grown in England out of the GB seed area. Complexity is the number of varieties. So as with everything, there's an 80-20 rule. So I think I'll have to look behind me, I can't see that. You've got 59 varieties that are accounting for 20% of the area, and then a huge long tail of the rest of the varieties. And you can see the number there, 32 varieties producing over 100 hectares, and there's 144 varieties which are making less than 10 hectares of production. So a very complex business, and you can argue with some of those statistics unnecessarily complex. Just to explain how long it takes us to produce seed, the seed that you're going to plant as a ware crop in 2026, assuming you're a ware grower here, the decision on how many mini tubers to order for that was made in September 2020, and many varieties are produced on a 5-year multiplication, so that would have been a year early, 2019. And of course, a lot of things happened in that time. 2020 itself was the pandemic, Brexit, the invasion of Ukraine, the degree of hyperinflation in energy and oil, and no doubt there will be some other events that happen in the meantime, probably at the end of this month, as our Chancellor takes to the floor. So therefore, what happened in September, so 2 months ago, that was for the ware crop 2031. So we, as an industry, have made decisions that will not come to land and are very difficult to alter in that period of time. So those are just a little bit of background statistics. I'll now try and comment as a breeder. HZPC research is an 11 million, this is in euros, spend, and we have some objectives. So we have eight different disciplines in our research team with 80 people in place dealing with that. And 2030, so in a few years' time, the objective is to have 75% of our varieties PVY resistant, so field immune to PVY, and to have a very strong late blight resistance, delivering us 3 sustainable varieties per annum. That's across all sectors, across the entire world market that we sell and produce potatoes in. There will always be political, legislative, and commercial pressures that are there on us to reduce the use of plant protectants and to reduce inputs, and particularly where they affect carbon is the number one measure, but of course there are many other measures of things that are damaging our planet, one could argue. And if we substitute these with genetic protection, then we also want to improve performance at the same time. And I put this deliberately left to right. Fundamentally, the smaller the organism, the more likely we are to be able to provide a genetic solution to the resistance. So virus, a very small organism. PVY, as I mentioned a second ago, we can produce field immunity, as we can with tobacco rattle virus. Other things like potato leaf roll virus, mop top are much more complex. And then to a certain degree, mild viruses are less important because we can manage those through. As we move further across, and that's why I put a line through slugs and wireworm, as those organisms get bigger, there isn't a genetic resistance. You can't make something slug resistant. You can make it less tasty. They generally like sugar. But blackleg comes on a 1 to 9 scale. So all those things we can do to affect the result or an alternative to a chemical solution. Having said that, nematicides, which are the very, very important, potato cyst nematode and tobacco rattle virus, but particularly in PCN resistance, varietal resistance is a completely different mode of action from using a chemical solution. So the nematicides kill the juveniles and prevent the invasion. The genetic resistance interrupts the life cycle, and therefore the invasion of the roots and the damage still takes place. So we then introduce the concept of tolerance. So they're very, very different actions. So one is not a direct replacement to the other, even if the end game is the same. Specification is important. What's unique about the UK, and this is why it's great that Phil is going to take this up. Crisp and French fry are largely worldwide activities. The factories that make crisps here are the same as the factories that make crisps in China or Europe, the same as French fries. Therefore, finding the specification of the product is very straightforward. The rest is, can they grow on our normally small, damp island? But of course, this year's weather was rather different from that. Whereas in retail fresh, everything's about a local specification, and it's quite hard to change local customer preferences. So we see a problem described there, which I believe is a Greenvale campaign. So Maris Piper I've described as one of the problems, but consumer conservatism and retailers' resistance to challenging the consumer with a new alternative is part of that limitation on the process. Whereas in processing, at least if you're breeding a variety, you're breeding something that can plant for many, many solutions. It's just whether it can adapt or can be used in that specific climatic situation. So that just reiterates the same point. It's also highly fragmented. So in simple terms, we have to produce a variety that has performance traits, i.e. it can be produced satisfactory at an economical, justifiable rate, and it meets the specification. If we achieve those two things, we have something that's a viable variety. Performance traits are both changing, as I've tried to illustrate the political change that's happening, and they're challenging, but they're relatively defined targets. You've got something to aim at. The question is, how is adaptable and compromising is the specification? If we really want to have low carbon, high yield, low nitrogen use variety, can we compromise on something else? So that's a question I'm sure Phil will take us to in a minute. Breeders have to have a very long-term vision on breeding. So seed is a long cycle, but breeding is a longer cycle. So at HZPC, we're producing, so TPS is true potato seed, so we produce 750,000 varieties a year. I haven't time to go into it and explain it here, but basically we can use genetic markers, which means that we only put in 130,000 varieties a year into the field as field generation 1. That's half the amount that we were doing 2 years ago. So not 2 years ago, 5 years. 5 years ago, we would have planted 250,000. So we've been able to use 3 times as many varieties and plant half as many in the field in generation 1. So we're looking at a lot more potatoes. There's a whole paper to explain how that happens, but basically that funnel goes down, and this is just a probability game. But we aim as a business, as I said earlier, to have 3 varieties per annum, and that starts off with making 750,000. So at the show today, we're trying to promote the variety Invictus, and just to put that in perspective, this is our first year of launch of that, and that was a cross made in 2013. EU breeding is much slower and more expensive as a result of Brexit, and the EU currently accounts for 3/4 of the UK, or GB, varieties. Not to go through all the detail, but basically leaving the EU has made it much harder. We have to duplicate DUS and VCU. PVR, we have to pay twice. Okay, that's just an added cost. And it takes longer for GB production, which means we will have more failures. So that's a far greater risk to the PB growers and people such as Mike, that we will have varieties that we have to find an exit strategy because we haven't been able to do as an extreme level of testing. So that is breeding in as short a time as I'm able to deliver it. Phil.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just going to speak to you for a few minutes about the kind of conversations we're having with retailers about varieties and varietal development. So I think it's fair to say different retailers may be at different points in this particular journey, but really the retailer's success will hinge on the availability, quality and value of potatoes on their shelves. We can think of instances in recent years where there's been gaps on the shelves, either through yield problems or quality problems. And there's an increasing realization that something has to change to make sure they have potatoes on the shelf 365 days a year. So I'm just going to step through a few things that we've been doing to further that conversation. So first of all, a little bit of background. So we've been going through quite a bit of challenge in recent years. In terms, the chart on the left shows planted hectares from 2011 through to 2024. You can see it reduced from about 130,000 down to about just under 100,000. So getting on for a quarter of a reduction in land being planted. So what that means is a constriction on supply straight away into UK potatoes. With 2023 recording the lowest volume yield we've seen. So that's where we are, but where are we heading to? Well, the chart on the right shows where we think we could be. This is probably worst case scenario in the next 10 years. So we've got the current factors that we're all aware of, but actually one of the biggest things that's coming up imminently is the decision on withdrawal or not of Nemathorin. And that's going to impact as we get towards the end of this decade in 3 areas. First of all, if that goes ahead, there's going to be certain varieties and some very familiar varieties which will no longer be viable. The second thing, if you look at the chart, green being fresh, retail, and the dark being processing, is that there's actually more resistant and tolerant varieties in processing than there are in fresh. There are a couple in fresh, which Greenvale are behind one of them, but nonetheless, we may well see a movement of growers into processing away from fresh. And finally, indeed, there might be a withdrawal of certain growers from potato production altogether. If you tot all that up, It could be, worst case, a 43% reduction in tonnage potatoes in the next 10 years. So it's a pretty serious situation. And that's really turned the head of a number of retailers. So the kind of conversations that we're having now, as I mentioned, different retailers are at probably different parts in this journey. There's a broad acceptance that variety development is critical to sector security. I think it's been surprising to some retailers actually how long that takes, how forward-looking you have to be, how you have to kind of try to preempt what's going to happen in the future. It means that an understanding and a certain investment in understanding what's happening in variety development and seed production is vitally important to secure that end-to-end supply chain to keep potatoes on the shelf 365 days a year. The retailers who are successful in doing that are going to secure the front end of that supply chain, because potentially there won't be the potatoes around to simply trade as they have done in the past. But when we're looking at varieties, it's not a case of one variety fits all. There's actually a lot of factors now that have to be taken into account when developing a variety and bringing it to market. At Greenvale, we split this into 4 pillars. Agronomy and growing. How easy is a potato to grow? What's the yield like? What resources does it take? Do growers want to grow it? Secondly, pest, disease and climate. How tolerant and resistant are varieties, for example, PCN or other diseases or pests? How resilient are they to climatic changes, whether that be rainfall or temperature? Third one, environment. Retailers, packers and others now all have to have published carbon reduction proposals. So varieties play a big part in that. A high yielding variety, one that uses less irrigation, one that uses less fertilizer, is going to be very attractive in helping deliver that carbon reduction process. Last but not least is the consumer. Of course, consumers want to buy something, want to be able to buy something, want to eat. So what we've got on the right-hand side is a chart just setting out some of those success factors. And indeed, for each of those different pillars, there will be success factors for each. So, for example, taste, texture, appearance. Interestingly, appearance seems to be actually probably taking a higher profile in terms of what gets a new variety listed more than taste or texture, because it's a visual appeal on the shelf. Fry testing, tube size distribution. Variety has to be able to yield standard sized potatoes, bakers, jumbos, even potentially baby potatoes as well. So really important, the spread of sizes from that. Bruising susceptibility. Richard mentioned Maris Piper. If we look at our own business, at certain times in the year, which is late spring, early summer, Maris Piper can account for up to 40% of our total business complaints. So it's a real issue. Yeah. And finally, tier level. So depending on the appearance, the texture and the taste, depends on where potentially, if you go for a name variety, you pitch it. Do you pitch it as a top tier, the finest to taste the difference, an exceptional positioning, or is it more core? Where's it fit in? So there's actually a lot of different factors to take into account when looking at new varieties. And also, depending on how they achieve these success factors, that can be a way to market a new variety to a retailer and to a consumer. One of the tools in the toolbox, however, is about not trying to have one variety that ticks those boxes. Can you use a combination of varieties to ensure that we have consistency for the consumer and all year round availability? So one of the things that's been talked about is usage-led packaging. Now, Greenvale have done some research with consumers where actually people are more concerned about being guided by the packaging to what should they use for a particular usage, as opposed to buying a variety and figuring out if it's the right one or not. So, for example, if we look at here for a roasting potato, that particular pack could have a specification which allows the packer to use 2 or 3 different varieties of potato in a particular season. Potatoes may be better off the field. They may store better. Some potatoes, if they have quality issues, can be substituted with something else. As long as those varieties look similar and perform similar, it provides a seamless transition for the consumer, where they're not actually aware they're moving through different varieties through that particular season. Now, we have done some limited trial work on this, and that's proved very, very, very successful with high consumer uptake of that particular way of working. So it's an interesting move. So we can say, look, actually, use several varieties. As long as they've got the right characteristics, this could be the right way to go. That doesn't mean there's not a place for name varieties, of course. As I touched on earlier on, there's probably 3 tiers. If you've got a new variety coming to market, it won't be available in huge volume, but it will have most of those attributes. So come at premium level, yeah, get it established. That's without so much volume. It's a growing area premium, so it's very attractive to establish a new variety and grow from there. But of course, there's then a conveyor belt of new varieties behind that. So as the next new variety comes along, the established ones can move into core and ultimately into value and ultimately be delisted. So there's a whole conveyor belt going on here. So in summary, retailers recognise the importance of new varieties within secure supply chains. You can't have a secure end-to-end supply chain without having robust variety development and really thinking about how you're going to use those varieties. So they need to be assessed on their ability to perform, the grower, the retailer, and the consumer. Where packers come in is that they're like the glue that glues all that together to ensure a smooth transition on the end-to-end supply chain. Thank you.
Now, seed potatoes are easy to grow. So a wee bit about what I do. Farm in northeast of Scotland. Ideal conditions for growing seed potatoes. Very little wear grown about. Great climate. So we should be getting healthy seed to supply basically the rest of the world. We like to think we're doing that. We're trying our best, but with lots of challenges in the way. So you can see we've 270 acres of taties, all multiplied from mini tubers, mostly on contract growing. So we haven't really much control of the varieties. We just grow the varieties that the companies would like us to grow. There's lots of bad ones, and there's lots of very good ones. And you don't know how they're going to do until you grow them. We've had lots of challenges with that over the time, and it takes a few years to find. I mean, as Richard said, 12 years to get that variety through, and we might grow it for 2 years, and we find it doesn't grow well to our conditions, and all that work's wasted, and the variety's gone, chucked, which is a huge cost to the whole thing because there's so much money goes into each one. So I've got 119 different crops, 35 varieties of potatoes, some of them from not even the length of this room would be a plot. So it's a lot of work, but that's what we do to try and make money. So I went through all my figures here just to give you an idea of what it costs. 2025 is a wee bit an estimate at the moment. But due to the export prices, the last few years, it's pumped up the prices we're getting for the pre-basic, which is great. You can see that unfortunately the export thing has dipped a wee bit this year, but there is a bit of that in contract grown as well, so it doesn't affect us quite so much. And the home market's in there somewhere, which is slowly creeping up to where we should be. And then the costs, which is important as well. The biggest factor that affects our costs is sellable yield. That can change a lot from variety. 2025 is just a guesstimate because they're not all sold yet, but the higher costs are more down to the poorer yields this year, whereas last year we had very good yields, and that can make a big difference to the cost of the growing. And this is an average cost of all the varieties I do. We just all the totals of the tons and the yield per hectare, and we worked out, and it seems to just gives you an idea of where we are, but yield is one of the biggest things. Challenges as a seed grower, as you can see there, the warmer climate is definitely having a big extreme change in of what we're thinking. There's more aphids, less frosts. It's just making it a bit tougher to get this healthier seed in the northeast. We must have to, I think we have to keep going north, but there's not any land more north, so we have to work to what we've got. All these things are probably what's happening everywhere in the UK. one thing that we're all seeing is lack of labour, less land, chemistry is disappearing, and the vulnerability of the whole market thing. But I've seen that, all my life. I've grown tatties for 30 years now, and that'll never change, I don't think. It's just something we have to live with going forward. But all these things are about our problems, so we try and mitigate these measures to try and create and grow healthy seed potatoes. That everybody will like healthy seed potatoes. Oh, sorry. Reduced growing generations is one thing that the breeders are trying to do, and the folk that want the seed. So instead of doing a 3-year system, where a lot of people are adapting to 2, so we get the mini tubers and grow them for 2 years. But it adds huge cost, the whole thing. But it does give you should give you healthier potatoes, because it's a generation less. We need to protect this crops from the aphids. With lack of chemistry and the warmer climate, there is more aphids. This must be the record aphids ever caught in the aphid traps. And if you've got aphids, you've got a lot of little beasties flying about spreading virus, which we don't want. We need to look a bit more at that. We're going to probably net a lot more of the PB1s to keep them protected for another year. That's our next challenge. There's a few other things on there I've mentioned, that the carbon technology and spraying crops when the regrowth's a problem. So that's developing. We've tried things like stem pulling, which hasn't been successful, but it may be the way forward to not rely on chemicals. As I said, grow it in isolated conditions like got the Shetland, but then there's not when you land there, it's maybe any good and it's a bit too extreme, and more virus testing. These things will all help to try and get healthier potatoes, but it all comes to a cost. So market demands really, if you want better quality seed, it's going to cost more money. That's all things we can do to get healthier seed, but it is going to cost more money. If you want poorer seed, it's a lower cost, but I think everybody wants in the end to grow this healthy seed. There's lots of other things. There's the new resistant varieties for better yields, better tasting, less inputs. There's all that is involved with the breeding. So why grow seed potatoes? Well, there's a bit of positives here. The climate is great. In Scotland, we have a great climate for growing potatoes. We've plenty of water, albeit a bit drier this last year, but we do have plenty of water. It is quite a healthy climate. We do get very good yields. We can't say we don't do that. Our knowledge network is fantastic. Hutton are brilliant, probably worldwide one of the best in the world for information, research, development. We're lucky to have that. We got on very well with SASA. They're great at looking after our crops, inspections and stuff, and keeping the health and quality where it should be. We still do have a lot of grass in our area, and that's very great for a good rotation. It's very important to have a big, long rotation. Grass is excellent for that, and you seem to get very healthy tatties with this longer break. Technology is moving very fast. You can see the automatic graders here at the moment. And a bit of money. It's great to see that the seed potatoes made a lot of money last year. There's no doubt about that. And everybody seems to have invested in new technology, which is great to see that they're willing to do that. And a wee bit of money to make it all work better and easier, reliance less on labour, which is difficult to get. The testing's a lot better. The GPS systems are fantastic now. All going great. So that's a positive. Better varieties. There's no doubt about that. The breeding thing's doing that. Keep focusing on that. Still profitable. We can't deny that the whole thing has maybe had a blip this year, but overall, over the years, it's still, if you make a good job, we're still making money. And it's enjoyable, and I've got fun sometimes, but not all the time. Okay, thank you. Is that it?
Thank you very much. 15 seconds to spare. So, that's it. So thank you, co-speakers, for keeping everything on time. So we now have 15, 20 minutes for you to challenge us on what we've just said. So stick your hand up and ask us a question. We'll do our best to provide an opinion. Yes, sir.
Me? That I can't answer. I don't know. Sorry. I can't answer the question. I don't. So. Yeah. Okay. If that's the case, yes, I presume they do. I don't know. It's Gerard's the man to answer that question. He's probably gone now, isn't he? I'm not acquainted with the BPTA. I don't do them a lot because a lot of mine are contract growing and stuff. Yes, you could be right.
We
need somebody to
go to that. I know a little bit about BPTA conditions of sale, and they are done or developed or agreed in conjunction with the NFU, and that's how they're set out to be. And we rely on the certification scheme. I don't think in that particular context they're different from RUSIP rules in that context. Yes, Tony.
Interesting.
It's not my area of expertise. I think at the moment, no, it's not. I think it depends on how the industry reacts to the challenges we set out. Now, Nemathorin may not get withdrawn. We think it probably will. I think it depends on how collectively successful we are addressing that. We have been relying for a very long time for some pretty traditional varieties. They've done very well to get to where they have done. So I think there would need to be quite a significant pressure on that all-round year availability to shift into gene editing.
Yeah, I think it will definitely have to happen. If we don't keep up with the rest of the world, we'll fall behind. And gene editing will be happening around the world, and it has to happen in the UK, or else we will find ourselves behind the rest of the markets in the world. And I think that's very important, especially with the lack of chemistry or pests, especially in weeds and things like that. Yeah, I believe it's going to happen. It will take a while, but I think we'll have to do it.
It's been forecast to happen for my entire time in the potato business. I can remember going to PBI Cambridge or Maris Trumpington and being shown that at the time. But of course, I believe we've just had a reversal of the step where one of the aspects of Brexit is that we could put a definition that was different from the EU definition of what constituted gene editing or genetic modification. And I understand we've actually fallen back in line with the EU and are not going to paddle our canoe separately. So therefore we're moving at the same pace as the EU as to what is the definition of GM. So following on from the retailer's perspective, that is GM food acceptable, it would appear that no in the foreseeable future. What the classification of what technique constitutes GM, we're now following EU rules again. Graham.
I think I think the short answer is, are they engaging? Yes, they are. As I mentioned earlier on, I think some retailers are at different places on that journey. The interest from retailer technical, agricultural and commercial teams in varietal development has jumped up significantly in the last couple of years even. That's been driven by, challenges on keeping quality potatoes on shelf all year round. So a lot more interest and focus has been put into, let's understand the complete end-to-end supply chain here. We know we can pack it, we can stick it on the shelf, but the bit before is actually the really critical bit. So I have to say there's been a lot of interest in that, a lot of understanding of what's probably required to buy into that. So there's starting to be more talk amongst retailers about having genuinely longer term arrangements with packers, but also with growers and with seed producers, because if that's not secured, then actually they're going to have empty shelves at some point. There's been a definite shift. Now, it's not snap your fingers, it's going to change overnight, but some retailers are now working at quite a pace to try and really get behind this whole concept. So I feel very positive about that. I think there's genuine open-mindedness from retailers about that too.
Sorry. It's hybridization in that respect is a different purpose. So you can think of hybrid seed as an alternative to producing a microplant to produce a mini tuber. So at the moment, that's why certainly our business focus is towards West Africa, harder places to move seed potatoes to, where we can move true potato seed. We can produce FG1, which means that they can go straight into production. So as an alternative, you could say it's still away from being totally homogeneous and an ability to produce processing potatoes, the fry colors, etc. As a way of Feed the World, our company's ambition of making it affordable to produce potatoes in difficult climatic circumstances, a long way from Northwest Europe. That's here today. That's now started. True. So it's unlikely with our frost-free period and other parts of the world's heat-free period that you would grow potatoes from true potato seed as a commercial crop. So if that's the question, then that's not the objective. What it will then have is the second line, which is how we have inbred lines for producing varieties with predictable outcomes in the same way as your cereal or sugar beet breeding, which are bred using inbred hybrid lines. So by taking a potato from a tetraploid to a diploid, that allows you to follow that route. So those benefits will come later, that breeding. We're already live and selling, or we have viable potatoes from true potato seed, but it's still one generation effectively in a polytunnel before you're planting a full-size tuber that can produce a full-size plant. It's not commercial ware crops from true potato seed. Does that answer the question? We have 7 minutes left. Effectively, we have no, the industry at large, you could say, has no control. If, as H said, PC, we believe that's a viable variety, it's our prerogative to continue to do it. It's Mike's prerogative to decide whether he likes the contract that's on offer or not. And if you like, if that variety, as he said, might end in failure, he might be happy that he's satisfied that he's been paid the price, but might feel very uncomfortable that his last 3 years' work has been fed to the cows. So financially we can satisfy, but that must be very unrewarding for a seed grower. So we have to balance that aspect. Your comment on, is it environment? That is always a question with breeding. Wherever you're holding something, there are many, many characteristics, and you can design a game where you can design your perfect potato, but basically once you start to squeeze one side, it'll pop out of the other, which is why I asked the question about what is the compromise. So very, very disappointed to hear it, that superficial aesthetics are still the key criteria for the consumer, where we think the pressures are coming from government and green lobby people, the right thing to do, responsibility for the planet, that we should be finding alternatives to using a lot of nitrogen fertilizer or a lot of chemicals that have collateral damage as well as hitting the target one. So there are only so many things you can breed for and have in one variety at a time. We can breed for everything, sorry, that's incorrect. We can breed for everything, but to have them all in one variety, the probability gets less and less. So we're already starting off with 750,000 varieties on year one. The question is, what should we prioritize? I mean, the process is that you run against a bump stop and say, Mike said he has 35 varieties, right?
Yeah.
35. If Mike makes a decision that his business is not going to have more than 20 varieties in the future, and all his competitors or colleagues, depending on your perception, make similar decisions, therefore, as a breeder, we can only have 12 of ours in the marketplace. We would then have to prioritize and say, well, I'm going to grow those 12 and those 2 won't go out. So you come against the limit of supply. So we have a highly functioning and successful market, and independence of decisions, and we have to make decisions of what we can do on the available marketplace. And if we don't like that, we have to find another solution. We're not going to become farmers, but that in theory is, if I can't find anybody to grow my variety and I believe in it, do I go and rent land and have a contractor? So it depends where that bump stop ends. There is no mechanism; it is market forces. Mike.
Well, we do all this trial work, but it costs so much money. And you said, I have seen so many varieties come in and come out. The only way to tempt the grower to grow it is to pay for it, and it costs more money. And is it money they want to be throwing at a variety they don't know about? That's up to the breeders and the companies to decide. But we can't keep growing more and more varieties. We'll have to try and select the ones that everyone wants to eat and grow it, that does the job. We spend a lot of money on breeding, which is great, but that's why I think the gene editing is going to be very important in the future. It's going to save money in the long run and not waste it. Useful. Less varieties.
Last chance for a question. We're at 43 minutes. If anybody wants another go. Yes, sir. It's potentially a very serious situation. TRV is a direct impact as well, and that's defined. And there is field immunity or field resistance, as there has been for many years. Record as a crisping variety from many years ago was tobacco rattle virus resistant, and that side of it works. As I said in my presentation, the difficulty with PCN resistance and tolerance is it's a different mechanism from using an nematicide. So you're not killing juveniles, you're preventing multiplication. So you need resistant varieties, and there's been a huge focus on adding pallida resistance to the pretty readily available rostock resistance. So rostock is quite easy to transfer through progeny crops and marker technology. And the first marker technology has been there to, or has been utilised heavily to select the pallida-resistant varieties. But as I said, it's a completely different mechanism of control. It's preventing multiplication as opposed to disorientating and killing juveniles. So it's important, and where infrastructure is, fundamentally irrigation and stores, and where potatoes have been grown, and therefore there's largely a high infestation of PCM. But resistance will not allow you to grow potatoes in high population. So it will be graduated. It will be more of a long-term protection of existing or low level of infestation at the moment with resistance. It will not solve the nemathorin high population resistance, in my opinion. Does that answer the question? I think it's probably shouldn't be relevant.
I don't know. We don't have that issue.
By definition,
Yeah.
it's there on the variety and available land, irrigation, skin finish are there. So yes, as we said, that those organisms are small enough for us to have resistance. If you just think of organisms in size, the bigger they get, the harder they are to manage. The